Now, when I talk about industrial activity and impact on environment, industrial activity is made possible by technology, science and technology. Our goal is not to bash science and technology. There are many people, famously Ted Kaczynski, right, the Unabomber. I'm not suggesting that technology is a bad thing. Technology has done a lot of awesome things. When we talk about the good old days and you look at some pictures from the 5th century, it's very deceptive. Cities were getting destroyed within a week due to plague and famine. There's nothing good in a sense about those old days except what you see in a painting. There's a lot of good about what we have today, and technology has made that possible. For example, longer lifespan. It was quite an achievement maybe 1,000 years ago to reach your 50th birthday. And for children to reach the first birthday was a big deal. Why? Because we had diseases, we had no disease prevention, we had no vaccines. Famine would wipe out. You heard of the Irish potato famine. We see drought. Today, thanks to science and technology, unless the famine is man-made due to political reasons, there really is no reason that an entire society or town should be wiped out because of famine. So, another thing is increased mobility. As citizens of the 21st century, we take great pride in knowing the world. We travel all over. We learn the good and the bad, and that enriches our lives. But this was not always the case. When the pilgrims first came to the US, whether they left England or parts of France, they said their goodbyes to their cousins and aunts and so forth because it was sure they are not going to see them again. Right? Today, that's not the case. You can fly from Austin to London. We have a British Airways flight that will, in about 10 hours, you can be there. So no need to say any tearful goodbyes. You can always meet people. But, increased mobility, just think about it. The modern aircraft is an amazing facility that human beings have. And technology made that possible. Decrease manual labor. Manual labor, it could be a virtue in some ways. We see Amish farmers, doing stuff by themselves, and it promotes a healthy lifestyle. But there are also negative consequences. A lot of factory work, like spray painting or arc welding and working at high temperature, these are hazardous to human beings. Modern technology, automation, robotics has spared human beings that during Industrial Revolution in England, there was child labor. Little children lost, fingers or body parts because they were working in factory. Technology has, obviated a lot of that. There is also, human beings were meant, what separates us from other animals is our ability to reason. Grunt work does not help that. It dulls our mind. And so technology has liberated us from this kind of repeat work that robots or something else can do. And last thing is widespread literacy. Today, human beings are very well informed. We know what's happening in Russia. We know what's happening in the Middle East. We know what's happening in science and technology. We know a lot of things, and this is because of widespread literacy. And one of the starting points was publishing of books that happened in Europe. Today, coming up to internet and information sharing, all this boons of technology. So we're not bashing technology. However, we also need to recognize everything is a double-edged sword. So here are some things we need to take a look at. Since 1700, the volume of goods traded internationally has increased by about 800 times. The number 800 is not the significant one, even though it seems like a wow quantity. As time wears on, there'll be more of everything, right? So 800 is not the main thing. The fact that it just happened in the last 300 years is what is more important. The time frame in which this happened rather than the amount is the significant takeaway. In the last 100 years, the world's industrial production has increased 100-fold. Imagine that. From Mesopotamian days to about 100 years ago, and from that 100-year point to now, we have increased production by 100-fold. What does that mean? Nothing is free, right? I mean, when you do something, you let loose some consequences. They may be good, they may be bad, they may be dire, they may not be all that dire, but nonetheless, common sense tells us there has to be some consequence. And since 1900s, the production of synthetic chemicals, is over 225 billion pounds per year. That's a lot of chemicals, right? When you manufacture chemicals, firstly, you have to mine stuff. Mining has environmental consequences. Then you have to transport these materials to a plant. At the plant, these materials have to be smelted, processed, all of which requires, energy. They release stuff to the air, to the water, and so forth. There are consequences. Continuing along these lines, since 1900, the rate of global consumption of fossil fuel, when you burn fuel, you release carbon dioxide, which is one of the causes of global warming. And since 1900, is increased by a factor of 50. Look, producing carbon dioxide is nothing new. I mean, we've been always doing it. Carbon dioxide in of itself and its production in of itself is not the big problem. It's how much in what amount of time is what we're worried about. So what is important is not the numbers themselves, but their magnitude and the relatively short period in which this has happened. Let me give you some concrete examples. Here is a graph that shows you the amount of carbon dioxide emissions from various sources like fossil fuel burning, cement production, etc. So there are multiple contributors to CO2 production. They're all shown in these dashed lines. But you can add all of them and you get this solid black line, which is the total amount. So this shows you the amount of CO2 produced globally due to fossil fuel burning, cement production, etc. And this is your time scale. Look at this graph. From about, let's say, 1825 to about 1950, we see pretty much like a straight line, right? And if that straight line continued, we would be going like this. Instead, what you see is it suddenly goes up very steep. So since 1950, that amount has increased drastically. Is it good? Is it bad? Well, the scientific consensus today is that it's not good. I must mention that there are scientists who think that this is not so bad on the other side of the aisle. But in the last 20 years, the dynamic has shifted with a greater consensus on this side that feels that there is an issue. How bad, that's being debated. But this is a fact. I mean, this is from the Oak Ridge National Lab. Here's another graph that shows the increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide. And so the earlier graph was total production. Of all that is produced, some can be absorbed by sinks, plants, and other things, structures. This graph talks about what's increasing in the atmosphere. Again, you can see, you see a trend from about 1750 that seems to be going along a linear path, but when you get to 1950, it goes up. So there is this short period in which there has been this huge spurt in CO2 production and increase in the atmosphere. That is what is causing cause. Scientists may be disagreed on ultimately what the consequence is, but nobody is disagreeing on the following: that carbon dioxide amount production and in the atmosphere has drastically increased since 1950. Nobody is arguing that. And secondly, nobody is arguing that human activity in large measure is contributing to it. Now, scientists and of course their adherents in society, some will say, oh my God, it's too bad, let's close all of our factories and close down all the roads and so forth. Alarmists. On the other hand, there are those who say, this thing is just a joke. The truth lies, as is often the case, somewhere in between. But on this, there is no doubt. So what this means is the diminution. When you produce so much, there is a diminution of regional and global capacities to deal with anthropogenic emissions. Anthropogenic means man-made. We talk about carrying capacity, right? We talk about the carrying capacity of Earth. What does that mean? It's like the proverb, the straw that broke the camel's back. Camels carry stuff in the desert, right? I mean, you can keep loading it. At some point, if you overdo it, a mere addition of a straw literally can, cause the camel to have problems. It can carry some amount of load. When you step into an elevator, you must have seen a nameplate that says not to exceed 10 people. Well, if you pack it with 30 people, there may be predictable consequences. So everything and anything has carrying capacity. Think about rainfalls. We haven't had much in central Texas over quite a few weeks. So if we have a torrential rain tonight, well, by tomorrow, everything will be dry. However, if it kept raining every night over the next 10 days, by the 11th day, we're going to have flash floods and pools everywhere because the soil is soaked. So it's at its carrying capacity. Any more will be a problem. And that's what we fear, that the carrying capacity of Earth to deal with this extra pumping of CO2 may be at its limit. We don't know. Now, as we produce CO2, there are also sinks that absorb them. But we don't know where the production minus the absorption stands, and that's kind of alarming. And at the very least, when you drive along a mountainside and there are steep, curvaceous roads, they say proceed with caution, right? That advice seems to be very valid here. We have an extremely rapid growth in energy consumption, which is natural. As population grows, that's what will happen. It's not just population growth. We need more energy. Your great-grandfather may not have had air conditioning, certainly not central air conditioning. They probably didn't have running water. They could not even imagine the electronic gadgets that are in your and my houses, right? So more energy. Evolution of economy to a more complex state, yeah. I don't think your great-grandfather would have known about Staples or Office Max or I don't know, any of these supermarket chains that sell electronic products or what have you, or these big giant megaplexes for movies, right? And increase in growth of materials and consumption. Again, more people, there's a need for more materials, and in order to provide more materials, you have to engage in some activities which does carry some adverse impact on the environment. Other things that technology also let loose, there's increased use of capital. That is understandable. Anytime you engage in a new venture, you need capital. What is meant here is simply that as you expend capital, that means economic activity is going up and likelihood of environmental impact. Shift in the form of energy consumed from biomass or direct fuel to electricity. What's wrong with that? Well, imagine this. When cavemen were just heating some logs of wood to cook their food and keep warm, so much vegetation was destroyed. But when you're burning anything, whether it's oil or gas or coal, for every unit of electricity, you have to burn a lot of something, much beyond the rate at which cavemen and women used. So, producing electricity takes its toll as well. And then human population growth. So, technology is a double-edged sword. Nobody is here to condemn it. We must continue to take advantage of technology. We just need to do so thoughtfully. I think in the past, since Industrial Revolution until about 20 years ago, we weren't that thoughtful. Now we have to be. Why? Because we see problems ahead. In this graph, what you see is population growth on the y-axis and years on the x-axis. You see these three solid curves showing spurts in population increase. The first spurt was when mankind learned to use tools. Before that, human beings could not face animals that were stronger than them, mountain lions, elephants, and so forth. They had to deal with their bare hands. They could not do agriculture. They just relied on what nature provided And you can imagine that population could not have increased because a lot, as many people were born, more died because of adverse. When human beings learned how to use tools, as primitive as they may have been, they had a better chance of fighting and preserving themselves, and importantly, going to the next stage. So stage one, invention of tools. Stage two is the agricultural revolution. Mankind learned to cultivate crops. They were not left to nature's vagaries in terms of when they found a fruit or some kind of grain. Now they could grow. It was under their control, and they could produce more and save. So that caused the next spurt. The third spurt was caused by industrial revolution. We were now able to mass produce. We were able to mechanize agriculture. We were able to provide automobiles and so forth. So we have been increasing population. We are at this point over here. We have what seems like three courses of action. One is we could go along this path, which is here, right? Which is slow down our development. Or we could go along this path where we dip a little bit, which means we drop the population a little bit. And these are just two examples, and maybe a combination of both. Suppose we did nothing. Then our course of action is going to be this dotted line at the top. We keep on increasing until at some point the proverbial straw will break the camel's back, and there'll be a drastic drop in population. We don't want that, right? I mean, we want things to be under our control. So we don't want to wait and see. Let's keep doing stuff the way they are, and let's see what there is. And so the consensus is that industrial revolution, as we have known it, is not sustainable. We need a different way of approaching. We're not saying industrial revolution or development is undesirable. We're just saying we just need to relook and see how to proceed with this.